Hello and welcome back to another episode of Town Meeting Matters. Town Meeting Matters deals with concerns of the precincts and the town as a whole. And we have, if you want to get on the show, just you'll see my email up there a few times during the show. Just send me an email and we'll work you into one of the future programs. My name is Ben Tartaglia. I've been in town for 43 years. Our goal is to have a balanced discussion and have more flexibility discussing town meeting matters than you would at the town meeting. You can interrupt and you can talk longer and you can even have a second question. Anyway, tonight my guests, we have representatives from 2, 4, 6, and 8. And on my right is Jonjy, you all know from town meeting. What's your last name?
Jonjy Ananth.
Ananth, yeah.
Ananth.
Okay.
It means forever lasting.
Forever lasting. And what does Jonjy mean?
Jonjy is a very special term. Don't want to take up too much of your time, but it's John, and in the Indian culture, when you add G to the end of a name, means with respect. So they thought, why not just put it in the name?
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that. And of course, we have a new member to the town meeting of John Lukach over here. Yeah.
New.
New this week. Everybody knows John. He does the most thorough research of anybody that I know. And I look for him for his criticism because he's always right. And of course we have Bryan. I want to call him Ryan because my youngest grandson is Ryan. Bryan Moss gathers no moss. And we're going to go through a bunch of things here tonight. So we're going to start off right away. The first thing we're going to discuss is the special town meeting warrants, which all deal with marijuana. They all do, right? All four, yeah.
Yep.
That's the only topic for it. And we're just going to go down the 4 articles quickly. Who would like to start that off?
You know, Bryan has been very vocal on this issue. I think you'd be perfect to walk us through it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can start it off. So there's 4 articles on the warrant. The first one being an article to prohibit, to ban marijuana establishments in town,
Commercial.
Commercial, yeah.
including commercial, including the 12. There's a bunch of different types, so it's not only retail.
But medical is still in town.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a good point because the first article about banning is not only about retail, it's about all
Growing.
businesses.
Oh, yeah. That's what I said, commercial,
Yeah.
any commercial enterprises.
So those include, it's good for I think people to know, is it includes marijuana cultivators, craft cultivator cooperatives, product manufacturers, retailers, delivery retailers, social consumption establishments, research facilities, testing laboratories, transporters, and micro businesses. So it's pretty much all business related to marijuana would be banned. So I think that is an important thing. It's not just retail.
But it does not ban personal consumption and the ability for individuals to grow a limited number of their own plants.
Correct. That's a great point to make. Yep. Not to confuse it with the Massachusetts
Told you,
law.
John knows everything.
Yep. Very good. And then the rest of the articles are there to show the balance between the decision making that needs to happen at town meeting. Are we going to ban all of the businesses related to marijuana, or are we going to regulate them? So the articles 2, 3, and 4 deal with that.
Well, 2, 3, and 4 will only be voted on if the results of the first article are to allow commercial business.
If that gets an aye, the other 3 don't mean anything. They're moot, as you're saying.
No. If the first one to ban is, in other words, if we decide to ban it, then the other 3 questions are moot. I don't even know if they're even going to discuss them. I would doubt it. If they vote not to ban it in the first article, then the other 3 questions come in. And to me, I think it's very important that the town council or some town officials say in advance whether or not, if it's not banned, and I believe that only requires a majority vote, but I would, on all of these 4 articles, they should tell us, does it require a majority vote? Does it require a 2/3 vote? Because I know that at least the second article, if we decided to go ahead and allow it, the first article does not pass to ban it, then the second article is a what do you call it?
2/3.
It's a 2/3 vote because it involves zoning.
Yeah.
Okay, and I believe, and even the third and the fourth one may also involve 2/3 votes. I don't know, but it's important because if we vote to allow it and move on to the second article, but it fails of a 2/3 vote, we have a problem because now it's wide open. We haven't banned it and we haven't regulated it. So it's very important that they tell us in advance so that people know that kind of situation, because that could get very scary.
It's important. I'm glad you're mentioning that because actually to ban it will be a 2/3 vote, and the reason is because it's a combined. They have to combine it in order to have it be a valid ban in the town. There's a zoning. You have to zone it and say none of them are allowed, so it will be a zoning change. So it's a 2/3 vote in order to ban it, as well as a general legislation, which is the majority. So they're going to combine that so that you don't have one pass and one not. So you really have to be able to ban it with a 2/3 vote.
I'd like them to be able to put certainly by the time they have the Finance Committee public hearing on this, which is April 12th. They should state clearly at that meeting exactly what those are. You know, majority, 2/3 votes on each one of those, just to make it perfectly clear. Because I know what you're saying, but I'm not entirely convinced that it requires a 2/3 vote to ban it.
Yep. At least from what I've seen from watching the Board of Selectmen meetings is that the way that they're presenting it, one is they're going to, I think, take this all in discussion at once, so that way we're not just focusing on the ban and not even talking about it. I think we're going to talk about the ban, talk about the regulations in its entirety and in the discussion, and then go to the votes. And the votes are, because they need the zoning, and this is from what I've heard from the Board of Selectmen meetings, is that because there is a zoning component to the ban, in effect, they're taking it together, so therefore you need 2/3 vote to ban it. So it should be clarified, but
that bothers me because it would be a majority vote if we took them into the first one individually. Is that correct?
Well,
No, it's not a matter. They're separate articles, Ben. So it's
But
not.
if you discuss them all at once and vote on them all at once.
No, you vote on them individually, but the important part about the ban is that there's a zoning component in the ban. Because the Massachusetts law that passed said that marijuana is legal and should be regulated like alcohol. Shrewsbury is taking to note is why is Shrewsbury actually bringing up in town meeting a ban is because any town that voted in the question 4 ballot question, and Shrewsbury voted with a majority to, I think 55% to not legalize, against question 4.
Right.
And because of that, there is language in there that allows the town, if the majority said no on question 4, then town meeting can have a voice on whether to ban it or not. Versus other towns that was a majority for question 4 to legalize it would have to go to the town ballot in order to ban it. So they're taking liberty that because
That is perfectly murky. I'm sure you all understand it. It just seems a little confusing to me. Do you have any comment on it?
You know what I really like about you guys is that you are so engaged. This was something that when I was running for town meeting, one of the things that I noticed the most was that we need to have more civic engagement. This is a great issue to have a debate about because there's a lot to be said on both sides. I agree with the idea that it does sound pretty complicated, but it's shows like these that kind of bring the issue to the forefront so that people can get a sense of where we're at. So when you come to town meeting, you come that much more informed.
We could use another 20 or 30 of you guys in town. All right,
So
go ahead. Want to say something
if I
else?
could just sort of get a poll, where do people stand on Article 1? I mean, come on.
I have no comment. I think we ought to ban it. We ought to take a year and see how other towns are doing and how much revenue really comes in and how much more police effort's involved. And then at the end of that year time. See, if we ban it, we can always bring it back. But if we get involved with the regulations and the zoning stuff, that makes it harder to change things, in my opinion. I may be wrong, but that's what I think. But one thing is that banking transactions cannot occur at any of these commercial areas for marijuana. It has to be done in cash. And that bothers me from a security standpoint, both at the location and at people driving home or transferring cash. It's very, very tricky. And I think there's going to be some unintended consequences, and I don't know what those are going to be yet. But I think we're going to by having it in town, by people coming into town, we're going to bring people from out of town, strangers coming in. I don't know where they're going to be coming from, and I think that means we're going to need more police presence, even if the commercial places hire police protection or security guards. So
What do you guys?
that's my
What do you
opinion.
guys?
Yeah.
What's your take on it right now?
So
Are you still deciding?
no, here's the thing: is that one thing that I learned when I was running for town meeting was that, well, it's not about me anyway. I'm trying to solicit feedback from our community, and especially in Precinct 10, we have such a diverse population that it's almost like, there's so many good points on both sides of the issue. On the one hand, and we're getting to the point of, there's a large population of people in our community who want to make sure that our children and our elderly are protected and are disabled. And then there's another population of people who, as our understanding of marijuana is developing, they want to make sure that we're promoting business in the town. So I'm soliciting feedback, and I'm trying to connect with people in our town, and specifically in Precinct 10. So I would encourage anyone watching this that if you live in Precinct 10, please reach out to me and let me know what you think.
Boy, he's a good politician, huh? He's really good. That was great. But you're an MD as well.
I'm a doctor in training, yes.
Yeah. So he actually has a little bit of knowledge. People say everybody's going to be crazy, reefer craze or whatever they used to call it. And other people say, well, most of these people are just going to go someplace and sleep. And I don't know, because I've never even inhaled.
I will tell you that I'm just someone who loves my town. I'm just trying to do something good for the people of this town. And I grew up here, and so you all mean a lot to me. I know that you've been serving on town meeting for a long time. You were on the Board of Selectmen, and I've benefited a lot from the people of this town. So I'm just trying to give something back.
Yeah, I would say I like how you're saying it's our job as town meeting members to understand the kind of pulse of the residents in our precinct. This banning article, to me, presents a unique situation, right, that we normally don't have. We actually have all the numbers, right? There was a statewide question 4 ballot that went out, and within our town, you can go by precinct. The majority of each precinct voted against question 4 by a small proportion. I think it was mostly, let's say, the overall is 55 to 45, so it's around there, right? So each precinct has said 55% have said we don't want to legalize marijuana, recreational marijuana. However, there's 45% that says we do want to regulate marijuana like alcohol. Now, why is that significant? Well, the town is taking advantage of a clause in there that says that town meeting can have a say on whether to ban it or not. However, because of the logistics, it needs a 2/3 vote to ban it, which would be it needs 67% to ban it. However, that conflicts with our representation of our precinct, right? We have 45% saying we want it regulated like alcohol. If we look at those numbers, then as town meeting members, if we want to represent the percentage of people in town that want to regulate it like alcohol, we cannot, it would not end up resulting in the 2/3 threshold that is needed to ban it. Meaning that, it's another way to look at it. I think that there's another perspective out there that the majority has said we don't want it, but that's not the 2/3 threshold that we have. So just the way I'm looking at it is we have some numbers, they're being interpreted different ways, but the way I'm looking at it now is that we're not reaching the 2/3 threshold that we need to ban.
But a couple of points on that. First of all, a different number, there might be a larger turnout if we had a townwide election. And so just because people didn't vote doesn't mean they were opposed to it. The other thing is that now that it has been legalized, they might say, okay, people who voted in favor of it generally said, yeah, that's fine. I'm glad Massachusetts legalized recreational marijuana. I just don't want it in my town. So people who voted yes generally might say no when it applies to their town. So I think that logic, I don't necessarily agree with that logic. Anyway, my take on it is, I think we need to get more information about what it's going to mean to Shrewsbury in terms of public health and public safety. Talking about police, talking about operating under the influence. Are we going to see a big increase in that? And if public safety, there's a lot of debate about whether low and moderate consumption of marijuana is a good thing or a bad thing. Is it better or worse than alcohol? I have yet to see any conclusive evidence on that score. That's the kind of information I think would be very helpful to people, and it hasn't been forthcoming. The other thing I would say from a public safety standpoint is, what are other towns doing? Because we don't want to become a magnet. If we're the only town in Central Mass besides Worcester and say Grafton that offers recreational, we're going to become a magnet for people coming from other towns. That's going to create traffic problems. They're going to tend to want, they come here. That doesn't mean they're going to bring it back home necessarily. They're going to consume it here. I don't happen to think that's a good idea. But if other towns, and I know Westboro and Northboro are going through the same process Shrewsbury is, if they decide to go ahead with it, well then we would be just serving the local population, and that might be okay. So I'm still sort of trying to get more information about it, because I don't think smoking marijuana or consuming it is necessarily bad, as long as you don't misuse it. But I also want to make sure we don't become, a place where people go to get their marijuana.
Yeah, and if that's a good point about if we did regulate it, we're going to have the minimum amount of marijuana establishments allowed under the law, which would be 20% of the alcohol licenses. Two. So I mean, we would have 2. We're not going to have 20. We're going to have, and that includes all establishments.
But if Northboro and Westboro and Boylston and West Boylston ban it, okay, and then those two establishments in Shrewsbury are going to draw an awful big clientele. And do we want that? I'm not so sure we do.
Yeah, and I think the good question is because just going back to the point about the 2/3 threshold, which I think makes this different, is that and you're right, it's a different question now, right? One was, do you want to legalize it and regulate like alcohol? And this town voted with the majority that it did not. However, people don't want those numbers necessarily. I was mentioning that people are trying to interpret those numbers, and there's 2 ways to interpret them. But it doesn't mean that, because there are people even in our select board that have said that they have personally voted against question 4, but now that it is legal, want to take advantage of some of the taxes. And I think the tax revenue that the town manager had reported back, because the Board of Selectmen had asked that and said, well, what is the tax revenue that we would get if we regulated this? And he talked to some of the industry, and they got back to him to say it was probably $125,000 to $200,000 a year that the town would benefit in tax revenue. Looking at, they look at certain, based on, they have their calculations that they do, but based on, I think there's like a figure of 9.2% of adults, use marijuana, and if you take that figure and extrapolate out to buying it, and you come up with this tax revenue.
Did they have any figures on the associated costs of it?
I think not. I don't think.
Well, you're saying costs in terms of public safety, police,
safety, education. I'm sure there's going to have to be some more education in the schools. That people know what's happening.
The potential impact of overuse.
Yeah. What do you do when somebody
the demand that we might be placing on Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, And the schools, there's the psychologists at the schools and things like that.
And if we get 200,000, 70% of that's going to go to the schools anyway. So you're not going to wind up with a net for running the town. You're not going to wind up with a net of 200,000. You're going to
Well, I don't see it that way, Ben. It's increased revenue to the town, and if that was if it was just increased revenue and there were no other negatives, then we should go ahead and do it. But we're saying that there are other negatives, and the question is, do the negatives outweigh the benefit of the sales tax?
Yeah. And those tax numbers are for retail, for that extra 3%, but there'll also be, if there's all these other business types I mentioned earlier, if we were regulating, on Route 20, there could be transportation-related businesses, with the research facilities, the lab testing related. So there's a lot more tax revenue that's not captured in there as far as actual businesses moving into Shrewsbury to,
I think, for example, like I don't know if you made the point, but the education of the kids in the town, but also, what about treatment? A percentage is going to have a problem. Just like with drinking, there's a percentage that has a problem. Are we going to have to support the treatment for these people either through local taxes or through, state taxes, another commission on the treatment for not using marijuana?
Well, the interesting point about that is that, to clarify, is that what was legalized or what would be sold to the retail would be 21 or over. So when we talk about kids' usage in town, if that's happening today, it's happening through the black market. If it happens after regulating marijuana, it's going to still happen through the black, through the black market. So
the
one thing that
problem is
retail,
the more retail establishments you have for it, and the more, and if they're, especially if they're in Shrewsbury, the likelihood is that kids are going to find a way to get somebody to buy it for them.
Yep.
It makes it more likely. So you can't just say, well, it's only for 21, and of course they'll only get it through the black market. They'll still get it illegally, but it'll be another avenue of getting it illegally.
yeah, and so you might have to say, do you want that illegal pathway to be from a legal, regulated market that's a little bit
There's
safer
a countervailing point because
than getting it from
one of some of the biggest problems with marijuana is there can be various dosage. Various concentrated of the active ingredient in the marijuana. I was reading an article that said 20, 30 years ago, when in the 70s even, the average amount of the active ingredient was like around 4%, 5%. Today you can get marijuana that's 20%, 25%. And so part of that problem is if you get black market, you don't know what kind of grade you're getting, whereas if it is legalized, and that at least the store would be able to would tell you, here's what the percentage is. So that's somewhat of a benefit. At least people know how much of it they're getting when they imbibe it.
Yep. And some of the other things we have to factor in is where else is it going to be available? So there's going to be home delivery at some point. So
by drone.
Right. So with Grafton, how they've just zoned it, their zoning areas it's going to go in is right on the Shrewsbury border, along that Shrewsbury border. So as far as is not having one or two in town going to really stop it when they can get it in any other way, either whether it be from Worcester or Grafton or delivered from home, or it just seems like it's going to be there, and we have to factor that in as whether. Is they going to drive the extra 5 minutes and get in Grafton or Worcester? Is that going to make a difference in the community? Something to think about.
Well, certainly, I don't want to break up this thing, but we have 5 minutes left.
Wow, time flies.
But this is the fastest half hour in television. It really is. It's very good, and I don't mind using the rest of the time if you feel you still want to discuss it. We'll do another one, in a month or so. But one of the things that bothers me about sin taxes is that, I consider this one, like if you smoke, you pay a tax on the smoking. Well, all this money is collected by the state and then spent. If they succeed in getting rid of cigarettes, we're still going to have the expenses that they've been paying for years. So they're going to have to find another method to tax you. I don't think this is going to be as great as that, but I can see down the road where you're going to have a flurry of activity. Like everybody's going to jump on this, and then it's sort of going to die down a little bit. You know,
That's not the experience in Colorado, Ben.
I know they're high in Colorado all the time anyway. Rocky Mountain High. Yeah, but yeah, that's why I could take a year and chew on this. We do have a AAA put out this thing on marijuana, and I've got a ton of those. I'd mail them out to every town meeting member, but that gets really expensive. So maybe we can put it in the packet that goes out.
Well, the other concern I have about marijuana is police don't have a reliable test when they stop somebody and suspect they're under the influence. I think at this point we need to have a blood test, and you can refuse a blood test. Whereas if you refuse, in the case of alcohol, if you refuse a breathalyzer test, I believe the law is written that's an admission of guilt. So I mean, that whole area has to be figured out. You know, how do you determine when somebody's been operating under the influence of marijuana?
Yeah, it says it'll stay in your bloodstream up to 2 weeks. The TMC.
Trace amounts.
And it takes 10 minutes to 30 minutes to actually get into your bloodstream. But
That's if you smoke it. If you eat it, it can take longer. And one of the problems they say is, and that's why I really don't like the idea of the eating part, because if you eat it, it can take a longer period of time, and people don't realize it's not having the same effect as if they smoke it. So they take another one and another one.
And then they're driving home in a snowstorm
Yeah.
an hour later. No, I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, no,
That's
seriously.
a
is
very good
problem.
point. And you brought up, John, the fact of what's in the marijuana. Now they lace it with stuff that is very dangerous.
They wouldn't be doing that with the legal stuff.
No, they were doing that.
And that's an advantage.
If somebody brings some in from a black market because they want it, hey, mom and dad are smoking marijuana. Why can't I? You know. But anyway, you know, I think this is all good stuff to bring out, and this will be on, I don't know, was it 23rd? Be on 5 or 6 times, this program. And since we get like 3 viewers, no.
Well, we'll all be watching, for goodness
Yeah,
sake.
I know. Well, that's who watches these shows.
But I hope you're all watching.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And I am really excited about this town meeting, I have to tell you. It's going to be great. And I think you all made great points. You know, there are ways to effectively regulate it, and you know, lots of unintended consequences to consider. So I'm hoping that you know, everyone who's watching will come to town meeting and have your say.
Well, we've got 1 minute and 15 seconds, so I'm going to thank you guys for being here, Bryan Moss, John Lukach, and Jonjy Ananth. Yeah.
Yes.
It's you know, it's been great having you guys on. It made for a really good topic. So we can just chat about anything. We have 56 seconds. And
I wanted to second that. Thank you both, you know, and you as well for.
I'm glad you finally made it.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and you know, I invite you all also to you know, listen to my show as well, Community Matters, and I think that it's great that we have these discussions in town. It's great we have the station, because this is a great way for our people from our town to really connect, and I'm hoping that you know, through venues like this and the example of people like yourselves who have been so civically engaged, you know, we can get more people to be more civically minded in our town.
Well, this has been a great show. A lot of different viewpoints. That's what makes it so good, you know.
Yeah.
You know, you get out there and maybe some people will watch us.
Great people, great show.
And we're going to be counting down. We got about 6 seconds. I just want to advise you that the good night.